Hello and welcome on behalf of the Museum of Art and Photography and the Bangalore International Center to Design in India, Contemporary Expressions and Traditional Languages. We're very pleased to have with us today for this last session as part of MAP's Creative Connections theme, famed fashion designer David Abraham of the fashion house Abraham Thakore, as well as the co-editor of Handmade in India, textile designer and educator Aditi Ranjan. Their full bios can be found in the chat box. And if you have any questions for either of them through the course of this conversation, please feel free to send them in via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Without taking a lot more time in introducing what they're really going to talk about today, I'd like to really just dive in and invite David to tell us a little bit about his design vocabulary and his practice at A&T that draws upon local Indian art and craft traditions.
Hello, everybody. I think, and thank you, Shilpa. I think you have given me a very good introduction. And I'll just start, actually, but I have to make this a disclaimer. I have to make a disclaimer in the beginning that I was taught by Aditi Ranjan, who was a very, very influential part of my journey as a design student. And in fact, I think a lot of what I studied at the NID under her and her colleagues has actually influenced the way our company has approached design over the years that we have. So now I've got that out of the way, so now I can just carry on. And so, we have always believed that we needed to find a voice for fashion in India. When we started, it was somewhat challenging, which was now nearly 30 years ago, because the whole fashion construct in India at that time had been completely imported when the National Institute of Fashion Technology, NIFT, was established in Delhi by the government of India. The curriculum and the teaching modules were all brought in, which was excellent because they did bring in the basic structure which taught fashion. But then as we began to see the Indian construct and attitude towards fashion and the way we consume fashion began to diverge. And it became it became a challenge because we began to realize that we needed to find an approach to clothing that reflected our climate, our seasons, the way we live, the fact that we have different patterns in the way we sit and the way we move, and all the ways in which we wear clothing, besides, of course, occasions, and also in terms of the fact that we have completely different seasons. We do not follow the international calendar for seasons. So this, in a sense, began to inform our work. The slide that you see right now is from an early collection of ours where we did all the fabrics were designed and developed in Mangalagiri, which is in Andhra, where we worked with a cluster of handloom weavers, which we have for many years, right from the beginning, and developed shapes that were all based on the Mangalagiri, which is a simple tabby weave, and developed softer shapes. And as you can see, we've always played with sari border because the classic Mangalagiri saris have a very simple border. And we were trying to see how we could use that fabric and construct it into clothing, which we could use here. And even for menswear, as you can see, menswear, we work with jackets, but you made the jackets in a softer handloom fabric, which for us really breathes much more easily, and it has the comfort of a shirt, not the constructed, the classic tailored jacket. So these images are from that collection. So Mangalagiri was one that we worked with. Ikat is another technique that we work with very closely right from the beginning. And in fact, we continue to always do a new collection in Ikat, because Ikat, I think, is absolutely extraordinary as a technique. I mean, it's a resist technique where the warp and the weft in two-way Ikat is tied and dyed with the most incredible precision. It's a mathematical process that has been developed over hundreds of years. And the craftspeople who do this, the weavers, are extraordinarily talented. This is another, and you can see we can get pure color with double ikat. So we play again the border, the traditional border of a sari, is actually just done through two-way ikat. And the white is pure white and the black was done also. So it is not necessary to have complex pattern like in the earlier image. This again is a famous, it's a black and white thing. I think for us, this was really our first collection that we ever did. We launched the brand Abraham Thakore at the Conran shop in London with these very same designs, especially the one on the right. And that has been the foundation of a lot of our work. Here again, playing with simple graphics, but using double ikat to explore them in different shapes. And here we move into a more complicated technique, which is brocades from Benares, where, they use a jhalas, which is I think it predates the jacquard in many ways, where it's a very, very complicated system of instructing the threads of how you pick them up and drop them so you can create these patterns. And the wonderful thing is, because we're working with very skilled handloom weavers, we did not have to repeat the pattern across the 5.5 meters of the sari. We actually did a drawing. We traced a drawing 5.5 meters long of this pattern inspired by the leopard spots and graded it right through the sari. So the entire sari is just woven in one continuous length and the pattern doesn't repeat at all. This is the magic of the handloom, and which is why we feel that there is nothing that can replace this for us. And also being trained in textiles first, I think, our clothing is very, very informed by the whole weaving process. In fact, I think every fashion designer in India is actually benefited by this particular background because we work with the cloth and then we work with the garment. So that creates a completely different synergy. This again is Benares, very complicated Benares weaves, but in the simplest graphic check. But if you go close, you'd see that the checks were completely engineered. There were patterns within the checks itself of very fine twills and broken twills. So again, we were playing. This is a close-up of a similar, but this is for a recent collection, which is different patterns. And this was inspired really as a kind of homage to our mentor, one of our mentors, Martan Singh, who did the famous Vishwakarma exhibition, and which he put these different patterns together in different fabrics. So we try to recreate that in Zari with the brocade weavers of Benares. Here we move to block printing, which is also a very, very, it's a technique we return to frequently because, as you know, every single block can create an individual pattern. You can create surfaces that are completely different. And here we were playing with the sari. This collection was based on menswear. So the patterns were derived from men's weaves, suiting weaves, the Prince of Wales check, the broken twill, the herringbones. And we printed on the saris, and then we stitched the shirts as the blouses and printed on the garments after they were stitched. So we were able to engineer the patterns into the garment itself. I mean, all this is just what you can do when you're working by hand with very skilled craftspeople. Every single piece is individual. So block printing. And here now, this is also a continuation of further experiments that we did with block printing, where we realized that you can also create flat, plain surfaces. To print does not mean, it is not necessary to have a motif when you print. You can just print a flat color. So the plain black, for example, in the trousers on one side, on the far right for me, is just black gud printing. We use the background gud to print the black, which has a completely different texture from a dyed black. And because we were printing it, we were able to leave the negative stripe at the side. So everything is printed into the garment, the shirt too, and even the jacket on the far left. So this is the speciality of hand block printing. You do not have to print continuous yardage. You can print for the actual garment. So as you can see, fashion for us has really been about expressing these different, expressing these techniques in contemporary clothing. Similarly here, the jacket on the left, those pockets, those negative pockets are actually trompe-l'oeil. They're not pockets at all. We printed the entire jacket in black and just printing, background printing, and just left the negative impression of a pocket. There is no pocket there, but it's just a tongue-in-cheek comment on how you can play with textile technique. This is a collection. We work with Kanta, which is a hand-running stitch, and then we We also interpreted using the machine by layering layers of fabric. We've always been very interested in this technique because it's one of the earliest forms of sustainable fabric. It's very fashionable now, but Kantha is really about recycling old saris and old fabrics in West Bengal. They hit upon sustainability and recycling much before it became a buzzword. This is again another version of it, inspired by austere techniques. And I think, sort of sums up a little bit of how our approach to design is. I think that, it's one of the most important things that as a designer, as a practitioner who's designing fashion in India, is this relationship, as I mentioned earlier, between craft and fashion. And it gives us designers the most incredible resource. A, because of this completely incredible scope of technique. We are really the last place in the world where all this can still be done and done practically. It's not an esoteric craft. We have the largest skill base of craft people in the world. And I think to join that, to marry that with contemporary design is very, very important. And a lot of our work has been involved in that direction of creating these links between fashion and craft.
So Aditi, can I invite you to weigh in on this at this point?
Yes. Thank you, David. I'm very honored and proud to be sharing this platform with you. I don't feel the difference between a teacher and student at all. So it's my honor. I think an important thing to also, I realized, and I've been feeling this when we talk about why textiles, a knowledge of textiles is very important for fashion designers and apparel designers, is because I think textiles is one discipline amongst the other disciplines like product design, furniture, and the other craft traditions, where we actually have to make a material first. You don't have to make wood, you don't have to make metal, but you have to weave cloth. So in a sense, it is quite different, even in terms of, as you say, why it's important to learn and have an appreciation and understanding of our textiles, not only because of our rich heritage, but also because of the fact that you have to first make your raw material. Of course, there are other techniques such as felting and other ways in which you can form and shape products without using woven cloth or without interlacing threads. You can do it from other composite materials, but the bulk of it, I think, comes from interlacing of threads. And therefore, I think the richness of the Indian traditions is so enormous a resource and a wealth, a real wealth that we must protect and we must conserve and not just protect, but we must help that it continues and is kept, the traditions are kept vibrant and alive all the time through reinterpreting and reimagining tradition, which is what I think is the message of your slideshow. I think it is really an excellent example of how you can revisit tradition. You're also, I think, sharing with the world what you appreciate about the tradition, because we get to know this through the way in which you select to reinterpret ikat or to reinterpret, or the clever ways in which when you do a two-layered quilting, you just form the border or you form a contrast by showing the underneath layer. So very, very important, clever details like this, which show your approach and your sensibility.
So, David, you mentioned something about these traditions being, sustainable at a certain time, like the kanta that you were talking about, before sustainable became a sort of trending thing to practice. And so maybe could you talk a little bit about sort of the ecosystem within which all of this happens, right? The artisans who are sort of small communities, the fashion designers, the end consumers, sort of just the larger structures within which all of this operates.
Yes, we were talking, this has been a subject which I think concerns a lot of people now. And particularly in this current crisis that we're going through, I think a lot of questions about consumption and sustainability have begun to, engage a lot of conversation. And I touch upon a point that Aditi just mentioned when she said how important it is for us to sustain these traditions in India. To elaborate on that, there's many reasons, but I think, we need to look at two things. When we talk about sustainability in India, sustainability in today in the world, the focus internationally is about, correctly so, carbon footprint, waste, overconsumption, a lot of problems which are connected, of course, with the first world, with the developed world, not so much with ours, because we don't consume. Our per capita levels of consumption are much lower than anywhere else in the developed world, for example. But these are very, very important. Issues. And with craft, you begin to realize that one reason why it's imperative for us to sustain it from the sustainability point of view is the craft industry is based in small clusters, is distributed across the country. The environmental footprint is tiny, and you are not just in the physical terms, people are creating things by hand within a sustainable ecosystem, scattered amongst, across the country. We're not driving people into huge anonymous factories in cities and living in subhuman conditions. People are living within these environments. So from that perspective, it's very important that craft is a very important part of our manufacturing process. But beyond that, sustainability also for us in India, unlike internationally, also has to be concerned with the sustainability of livelihoods. This problem doesn't exist internationally because these livelihoods do not exist in most countries of the world. In India, we actually have, this is the second largest, the handloom and the textile industry are the second largest employers after agriculture. We have to remember that. We are sustaining traditional livelihoods. We have to sustain these traditional livelihoods. A, of course, because they produce this extraordinary wealth for us, because we are, and two, because of the very nature of the systems of production, which are sustainable. And if we don't, we are sustaining also the makers of our material culture. We cannot afford to lose that. If we lose that, we lose a link with everything that makes us what we are. So it has to be, it's imperative from both these perspectives, sustainability of, in terms of physical or environmental reasons, and as well as from the cultural reasons. I think both these are very, very important. And of course, as we all know, Indian textiles are I think they are just the richest in the world in terms of technique and in terms of the width and the level of skill is extraordinary.
So if maybe Aditi, you could sort of step in here. And when we're talking about the expertise of all of these, the artisanal communities, the fact that there are so much rich histories that, they collectively recall and that they collectively embody. Could you perhaps talk a little bit also about how, we're looking at traditions that aren't really static. So it's not just expertise that is, merely one technique, but we're also talking about a range of responses that those techniques have evolved with over time, whether it's motifs, whether it's actual technique, whether it's response to certain markets, etc.
Yes, I think as David said, that craft traditions not only embody sustainability in terms of the resources and for the planet, but also very important that the material culture and cultural there should be a cultural continuity, you know. So why do anything about crafts? You know, why can't they be left to die and new things will grow? That can also be perhaps one way of looking at it, but I don't think that's what I'm proposing. But what I mean to say is that why is it necessary to make sure that they not only survive, but there's a very vibrant and a lot of vitality in this in the craft traditions. I think what's important is that the craft traditions embody a variety of concepts. And some of these have to do also with our, what would I say? Some of these might touch upon ideology and philosophy. There were times when there were times when, or there are times now where need has become greed, perhaps. And you find that there are designers, there are young designers like some of our graduates, Maku Textiles, for instance, in Calcutta, where their philosophy is that you should, they offer only indigo dye. They offer only one dye, whatever you can do with shades of indigo and white. White is not a dye, it's a natural color. So that they're not pandering to all kinds of tastes. Otherwise, if you're in the market, you have to offer many, many colors, and the colors have to change according to seasons. But here is one philosophy that says that, we offer only blue, we offer only indigo, which is there's a very strong reason why we only promote this one color, and you better choose from it, And I think that's an important, it's an important way to educate, philosophically and ethically, because sometimes we go overboard by asking for a great choice and a lot of range. And so I think the traditions are not only about, these are repositories of knowledge, but they're a storehouse of knowledge, and not just for techniques and materials and designs, but also because of certain values. And I think those also need to be spread, and those also need to be imbibed, and those also need to be nurtured. So one of the examples, as I said, what Maku Textiles says, that they want you to only look at blue as a color, or look at white as a color. There are so many shades of white, that perhaps if you look at a lot of the crafts, and I am going to show them in my presentation, that there is a sensibility, unfortunately, in the export market or in Japan, which would, where the natural color has a very, very strong and high appeal for them. And it has great significance, because it means you don't pollute the water, you don't need, even natural dyes require a lot of water and require to grow plants, and we might overrun the garden with plants for natural dyes, if everybody starts doing it. So I think looking at some of these which were intrinsic to some of our traditions. So the whole range of white clothing, and I think white is a color that is used in men's clothing and women's clothing. It has many different cultural meanings, but with little pattern, or even without a dyed pattern, dyed introduction of a dye, there's a lot of texture and a lot of design and pattern that should satisfy us. So I think there are a lot of values like this, which also our traditions embody. They also embody intangible aspects, like in the Northeast, a lot of work related to textiles, or even in different parts of India, amongst handloom weavers communities, where the entire village or several households help the weaver in doing processes like warping or street sizing of the warp. So all the pre-weaving processes, I think, is done collectively. I don't think people who come and help to put up a warp are paid. But when you look at maybe the same sort of situations, workshops in the cities and in urbanized areas, then every task has to be paid for. So there is a lot of collective effort also related to many of our traditions. And it's not just the craft of making where products are made and textiles are made, but lots of instances in the Northeast where an entire village in Arunachal Pradesh walks down from their village up in the hills to the river, which is many miles downhill, to build a bridge, and goes back to their village only after the bridge is built. And nobody pays them. You know, this is something that they do as a collective effort. So there are many of these instances which I think as designers we need to understand and see if we could bring that also in some way as a process, because design is not only designing a product, it can be a process, it can be a system, it can be a service. So perhaps we need to look at some of these which are were intrinsic to some craft traditions, especially in the Northeast, and you still find them in some pockets in the Northeast, because I think they were very self-reliant. They made everything in their environment, in the built environment, they made it themselves. Of course, these times are changing now, but if we can also revisit some of these values.
So before we move into Aditi's presentation, David, I'm going to ask you to respond on the thing that she's talked about in terms of, design philosophy, and in terms of maybe looking at how design can be a collective process and how that might reflect, or, what your sort of take on it would be in your own practice.
Well, I think, the whole history of the way a lot of these crafted textiles and products has been done demonstrates, this, because it was an integrated system in which it fitted in and in which it involved the whole ecosystem. We are now, fortunately, unfortunately, I don't think we are in any position to sort of evaluate. We can't really pass a judgment to that. Living in a time when there is, of course, a lot of industrial production, and that is not going to change. And the challenge for us, I think, in India is to see how they can coexist and that one doesn't overrun the other in this space, particularly in which the small scale and the craft industry gets, Fortunately, what we have seen in the past few years, there has been a resurgence in India and a much greater awareness towards craft. And I'm told by the several people I've been asking this question to, is that there have been more opportunities in some areas. Some crafts, of course, have not survived, but many have, and have been able to find a place for themselves. Because I'm bringing in I'm looking at it from the perspective of an economic perspective. And as I think the two coexist, I think we've also, if they are to coexist, we also have to realize that we're going to have to slowly move the handmade and the craft, which is very, very valuable, which is actually a very, very valuable skill, slightly higher up the ladder of value, the value chain. And it is ultimately, I think the ultimate definition, we keep talking about luxury. Luxury is the word that is thrown about in the fashion business. Almost it's just like everyone talks about luxury. It means nothing really. All luxury really means is a cost of it. It's very, very expensive. It's just an appellation for, overpricing a product in many, many cases. There are some genuine cases, of course, where the workmanship, the design, and the craft are exemplified in luxury products. But in many cases, it really isn't. It's just a marketing term. But as we all are now across the world, I think across every society, beginning to realize and value artisanal work, craftsmanship. It's not just in fashion, it's in food. It's in everything that we are consuming now. we are beginning to realize that this is a very viable option, and we have to be able to support these products. Indian craft must move into this area faster and faster. It already has captured a fair amount of that space, but I think we also need to protect it. It needs to be policy support. We need to move it up the value chain. We need to make it a very attractive source of income for the craftsperson. We have to find, it's not just fashion, it's everything. It's from architecture to interior design to every area of product that is manufactured today. We need to find ways in which we can celebrate and show the finest that can be done and set higher levels of value so that this becomes it becomes truly a luxury. And it is actually one of the last luxuries we have in the world, is to have something. I mean, look at khadi, for example. To have a fabric that is hand woven from a yarn that is hand spun. And as Aditi was talking about the plainness of white, where you don't even need to introduce color or pattern. If you look at the beautiful khadi fabric, whether it is in a very coarse weave or whether it's the finest 300s count from West Bengal, you can see the texture, every bit, every movement of the maker's hand is reflected in the yarn, both in the warp and in the weft, and in the beating, in the actual weaving process. That is luxury. I mean, that is the most incredible piece of cloth because it doesn't reproduce, and every individual maker leaves a stamp. Now we have to start, the discourse has to move in this direction. It already has, but we have to reiterate this till we are all hoarse. I think this is something that we need to keep talking about. And this is I'm not discounting the industrial. I'm not discounting mass manufacture. I'm talking about both coexisting. Both have very different places. Both have very different needs. But this is one way that we can try and ensure that they both survive. I mean, that this survives along with this.
I think this might be a great point, Aditi, to sort of get into your presentation.
Yeah.
Then seems like a natural turn to take this conversation into.
Is that visible?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to share a few examples, and these are mostly crafts which use natural material like palm leaf, sarkanda grass, bamboo, because I think not only because they are sustainable, but all these examples show the other side of our story, which is not only trained designers who participate in this process of contemporary expressions, but also people who are self-trained or people who are entrepreneurs, and then, through their intervention and their mediation, you have a whole range of products which give sometimes a new lease of life to languishing traditional crafts. On your left-hand side here, you can see examples of bamboo basketry, but used for lamps in interiors. And I think architecture really is the space where, sorry, this is moving far too far. And I think architecture really is the space where I think even you don't have to worry about whether a basket or a product made, which was earlier a basket and a new contemporary version of it, has a function or not. It definitely brings a warmth to the interior, and it does as much or much more than even, say, in a very contemporary and modern interior where you have glass and metal. It feels just right to have a craft, to have a basket, because the basket brings in warmth. It is a natural material made from either of these three materials or similar natural materials. It also brings a sense of history and culture into the space. So these are examples here developed by Sonam Tashi in Sikkim, and you can see basketry techniques which have been used for lamps in very contemporary settings. And you can see the very diffuse light that is permeated through this very lattice-like surface, which is possible because of the interlacing of the bamboo strips. So I think a lot of basketry, textiles and basketry have a lot of overlap and share a common sensibility. These are palm leaf crafts of Tamil Nadu. In the upper row, you can see these are traditional products. There are carrying baskets. This is a set of nesting baskets used by a community in the sorry, this keeps shifting. And you find the winnowing tray, you find a water pitcher, and you can see what happens when there is a collaboration between a designer or an entrepreneur with skills of sensibilities of design and collaborates with the traditional craftsmen to produce new offerings for a totally different situation, a totally different context, but using the same principles and the same concepts which are present, such as stacking and such as nesting, which you can't see in this picture, but which is inside this basket. And you can see how it is reinterpreted and reimagined as trays, which are nesting trays, nesting baskets. And this is a basket for carrying babies. So this is done in the southern part of Tamil Nadu. And these are used by several communities. The traditional products are used by all the communities in the region. A similar material, palm leaf, but a very different level of craftsmanship and skill, which was done in Chettinad. These are traditional basketry called cotton, made from palmyra or palm leaf. They are very unique because of their craftsmanship, also because they are double layered. They are double layered, and if you can see the way in which they have been finished. So there's a technique of plating. These are all plated. And this one, after it has been in the process of plating, is also a kind of embroidery technique, which is unique and peculiar to the region of Chettinad, which is in the southern part of Tamil Nadu. And this is an example I'd like to share because it's done by, it's initiated by Vishalakshi Ramaswamy, and who started the MRMRM Cultural Foundation in Chennai. And now there's a whole very, very wide range of gift items, baskets, trays, a whole lot of new offerings because of a revival of this languishing craft. So you can see the kind of process that happens, the design process. This is the basket, and you can see what happens when you have the rim, which is difficult to perhaps use it as it is. So the modifications that happen, this has become, the rim is still stronger, but has been replaced with thread. And it is, nicer to feel, or when it comes close to the body, or for you to handle it. These make excellent gift items, and then they have been used as gift items by many people. And you can see here that Vishalakshi also has used and found a sort of an expression that comes from the technique itself. So the method of generating different patterns using colors borrows from the method of plating, which is essential to this basket. These are also seamless constructions. So I think that also lends itself to the shape, besides the fact that they are stacking. So if I can go back to this, it's not only about how design revives and how design as a tool for bringing about a change. This illustrates that very well. There's not only revival of a languishing craft, but also teaching women to learn a new skill, training them, setting them up as self-sustaining producer groups. It's also educating not only the bringing training inputs not only to the craftspeople but also to the customers. So here are customers who perhaps would have selected plastic or some other gift containers are now willing to look at a very, very different sensibility, are willing to learn to appreciate a very different kind of sensibility, very vivid use of bright colors. And I think design does both. It not only imparts skills and brings in economic gain and brings in an economic change, but also in terms of changing the aesthetic and sensibilities of the customer as well. I would like to show yet another example where the Jasmina Zelian, again an entrepreneur who's got set up 2 workshops, 2 of her design companies, one Cane Concept where she makes furniture, and the second is Heirloom Naga, which produces textiles woven on the backstrap loom, which is indigenous and endemic to the northeastern region of India. And here you can see that she has really understood her tradition, which this is the traditional basket. And you can see that its form is a direct response to the terrain, to walking on the hills, where you need to sort of manage the slope of the hills and to carry loads. You need your hands free for walking. And this shape, the construction and the way the basket is designed actually responds perfectly for that situation. But what she has done is used all of these ingredients, but given it as a totally different offering. And not only that, she's also brought in her liking and appreciation for textiles, which she's from Nagaland, and she's, I'm sure, very well versed with all the diverse collections and identities that each community has through their textiles. And she has managed to bring it into the baskets, I think, in a way very different from most basketry forms that we see, because here you can see this is a direct connection that you can make to the tradition. But this is something that is quite entirely different, which I would say is something that is unique offering that she's giving and bringing on the table. You can see here a whole collection that she has developed. Of course, here these are dyed, whereas the original, in the traditional form, they were all the natural color of the bamboo and cane strips. These are made from bamboo and cane. These are mostly made from bamboo, but these have been dyed in natural dyes. She's also developed a whole range of bamboo plates, which become a part of which can be used in home decor, where the patterns are also very reminiscent of tribal textiles. They are bold, geometric. And again, you can see here the very typical use of indigo and natural dyes. So this is also something that I think you can easily associate and has a very strong identity of the Northeast. So these are examples with basketry. And here you can see a very unique form, I think. It's something that is probably very, very ubiquitous in the North, especially in Haryana, from Delhi, Haryana on the highway where the craftsmen sell these products. But it's also that it has entered most of our homes, whether they are in the cities or whether they are farmhouses in the cities or resorts, of a chair that was developed from a traditional indigenous stool, because I don't think we had a tradition of furniture. We mostly did everything at sitting was on the floor level, but low level seating is very much part of our traditional furniture. So it's an incredible construction. And you can see it uses a plant, a grass called sarkanda, and the traditional form uses the different parts of the leaf to make a product. So you can see here the reed or the stem of the plant used as the basic structure. And you can see that it is bound with the fiber and rope twisted from the same plant. So this is also a lesson in sustainability that was practiced and which is reflected in most of the crafts, as if you see even in the palm leaf, where all parts of the palm tree have been used either as a source of food or in crafts or in making rafts, or there's nothing left of the tree which is wasted. Every part. So it's resourcefulness at its, I think, at its peak. But here, with the collaboration of a designer and I think an entrepreneur such as Fab India, but perhaps somebody else has done it, I don't know. But you can see how this the stool has got a natural extension of a single chair and then a double-seater, triple-seater sofa. And these forms are, I think, are quite like if you would carve a chair out of wood, which is done in the Northeast in Nagaland, because there's a seamless integration of the seat to the backrest and the armrest, which is quite unique and which I think this is a very inexpensive alternative to wooden furniture. So these are also concepts that got promoted because of needs in the urban cities. So you have a working together or a symbiotic relationship between different groups. The makers could be from from rural areas, and the users could be from urban areas. But we need to ensure that there is a fair trade. All the fair trade practices are in place so that the craftsperson's wages and earnings are done fairly, and they are not exploited in this process of mass producing or catering to very high-end markets. This is not a very high-end product, but I think it is in very many homes, and especially young people who want to start their office or to start their homes. These invariably become part of their home spaces. So these are a very few examples I thought which might help illustrate where traditional craft would invite the participation of different professionals, be it furniture designers, maybe architects, entrepreneurs who have an idea. It might require people for extracting fibers. A lot of the quality of the product also depends on the process of extracting material from the plant source itself. So there are so many aspects of science, of technology, and these inputs, I think, are what need to be brought in together, and in a very symbiotic way. I think they need to work together so that we can develop products, and these are being developed right now. What I have shown you are all examples developed by people who've not gone to design schools and learnt. I mean, this is something they've done from their own exposure and their own ideas. And this is what they have done, working with the community. But they did have a very strong, they did have a vision and a will to work with the craft community. They felt that the craft that they were surrounded with or had lived with and had grown up with was part of their upbringing, was part of their culture, is something that they wanted to work with and bring, so that there would be a better quality of life for everybody involved in the process. So I think it works both ways. It not only works where, products, you make products which are, which respond to contemporary needs, but I think that contemporary needs also influence how products and the making of products can be understood and can be done professionally, because I think today climate change and the way we are using the natural resources, I think these are very, very important concerns for anybody engaged in the craft sector and with the craft sector. And we definitely need to bring this kind of learning and understanding to make it a part of the process, so that, we don't end up introducing products which create problems or which do not look at its impact, or which do not leave the leave resources for our future generations.
So before we open out to the audience questions, David, if you could respond very quickly to what Aditi has been saying and what you sort of think would be, sort of your relationship with weavers or artisans who are actually helping you create your product, and, sort of what do you think the responsibility of a designer would be in that space?
I think I can start. I mean, of course, what's very interesting, what we've just seen, which is all the basketry work which we've been seeing that is being practiced right now in India, is how strongly linked that is with textiles, because they are essentially plant materials, like linen, cotton, flax. I mean, we have palm leaves, and the way you interweave two yarns together is very similar to the way you weave a basket together. Of course, you use a different mechanism to do that. So I think in one way, this demonstrates how wide the scope is. What is very interesting to me is that there is a lot of intervention we can see. I mean, I know we as a brand, A&T has been very responsible for introducing new ideas with the craftspeople that we work with the weavers or the printers. It's something we do every season. So it's a continuing process. And what we've seen in the baskets also is how responsive it is to design input. So how the entrepreneur, not necessarily from a professional designer, but also the entrepreneur herself generates new products. This, I think, is a very key part of this whole discussion about design and craft, is that craft is extremely flexible. I think there is one point of view which sort of tends to treat craft as something, or traditional textiles and craft as areas which are in silos, which exist in silos, and that need to be maintained at all costs and preserved. I think tradition only survives if it is modernized, if it's contemporary, and if it becomes relevant to our lives. And we can see this happening across textiles, in bamboo craft, and in all the other crafts, is how willing the maker, the craftsperson, and the artisan is to engage with this. And this is not new. This is historic. I mean, India in textiles, I can talk about textiles more than I can talk about clothing, more than baskets perhaps. But I do know that we've been, at one point in history, the largest exporter and manufacturer of textiles in the world, which is about 300 years ago, because everything, and the craftspeople who did that and the makers who did that were extremely skilled tradespeople too. They knew what the markets wanted. They gave them what the markets wanted. You can travel around the Coromandel coast and see the great chintzes of the Coromandel chintzes, which flooded Europe. And they gave them what they wanted. They incorporated their motifs. You'll find Western motifs taken from Dutch pattern books, which have been added into the block prints of, say, Machilipatnam. You will find checks, the famous Madras checks being woven for the African market out of Tamil Nadu. We've had a history of engaging with the world and providing them with designs, with products that address their needs. And this has to be continued. And it does. I mean, I think the makers in India are very, very flexible about this. And we see it happening. And I think now, particularly in the fashion industry, I see a whole generation of young fashion designers or the generations after me who are now very closely engaged with the crafts because they need the craftsperson to do it because at the designer end of the market where volumes are small, this is an ideal base to manufacture your product. And plus you have access to a huge number of skills, which you don't really get in the industrial sector. In the industrial sector, you need to make 5,000 meters for it to be viable. In the handloom sector, you can weave 150 meters and it's a viable product. And you can incorporate techniques which can't be done with that kind of flexibility. So we are seeing this link now, and it's adding to the vocabulary of the craft, the particular craft that's being worked with. And this is where design, it's not just the designer, it's the market and the maker, all three together combine and create a product which is relevant. And I think it's our response. I mean, this is something that we have been talking about, and I think it's something that we all believe must continue. And there must be greater engagement, both from the consumer, as well as the maker, as well as the entrepreneur and the designer. Everybody has to be involved in this process. If that's a response to your question, Shilpa.
Yes. So we're running very short on time. So I'm going to take one question from the audience for both of you. So Aditi, if you could go first, and then David, but you only have about 2 minutes each. So
you'll have to hold up your finger when the 2 minutes is up.
So Deepthi Rao asks, now that the handloom boards have been dismantled, can you envision other alternatives that might be able to fill the gap that now exists in the craft sector?
Yes, I think there could easily be other forms of associations. You already have alternative marketing based on the traditional heart, which is the Nature Bazaar organized by Laila and Delhi Heart. So similarly, I think there could be a forum, a platform, which could bring all the stakeholders together. What it actually is, I think we should involve the craftspersons. What happens mostly is that we are very well-meaning, but we do all the thinking for the crafts community. So I think it has to be something that can be evolved with all the people, especially the crafts people involved. I've been in many organizations where I'm invited to, say, a general body meeting of the trust or the organization, but you find very few crafts people who are members of the steering committee or governing council or whatever these big committees are. Now, it would make a lot of difference if the stakeholder is very much a part of these meetings, not just that it's done by other professionals, but including professionals such as the craftspeople themselves. But what it should be exactly, I don't know. We'll have to brainstorm and figure out what kind of a platform can be created.
Okay, David, I'm going to throw a different question at you from Shubhner Jain, who asks, what is the difference between A&T's ideology when looking at craft or the traditional and cultural knowledge of crafts? How is it different from other brands doing the same thing where they only sort of take techniques from older craft traditions?
Perhaps the difference might be slightly in approach, because maybe we are looking at it from a more holistic view. We're looking at the final design product as the result of a very long and evolved ecosystem, and this is the result of it. And perhaps in another brand, they would just look at the craft and they would see what is available and use it as it is without getting involved in the. But having said that, I don't really think that one is necessarily, I can't take a view that our approach is better than the other approach. I'm just very happy that all the brands are using the craft. Go for it. Even if you don't really know the process, even if you use it. Buy your fabric from the handloom sector. Work with the handloom weavers. Work with the hand embroidery karigars. This is what the fashion industry has to do. And as consumers, please go ahead and buy this product. That's my message.
Well, that's a brilliant note to end this session on, reiterating and underlining everything we've talked about. So thank you both so much for coming on this event today, for giving us such an educational hour and all of your time and your insights. We hope that we'll be able to collaborate with you and see you sometime in the future in Bangalore at MAP and the BIC. And for everyone else who attended, thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope we'll see you at our next MAP talk in October.
Thank you, Shilpa.
Thank you.
Aditi, lovely talking to you as always. We'll continue the conversation, of course, very soon.
Yes, of course, definitely. Yes.
Okay, everybody. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.